My son, Noah, texted me a photo he'd snapped from across the street. Grainy, overzoomed, taken through a windshield. A man in a battered navy hoodie stood near the bus shelter outside the old Kroger, head down like he was bracing against the cold. Noah wrote, "Mom, I think I just saw Dad." My stomach did the thing it does when a bad memory wakes up. Not nausea exactly, more like my body trying to eject time. I stared at the picture until my eyes burned. The shape of the shoulders, the tilt of the head, even the way one hand tucked into the pocket like it belonged there. Could have been anyone. Could have been nobody. Noah called before I could type anything back. His voice was tight, adult in a way I still wasn't used to. "He looked right at me," he said. "I swear he did." 12 years is a long time, I said, trying to keep my voice even. "People, you see what you want to see." There was a pause and then, "Or what you're afraid to see." He'd been 6 when his father vanished. 6 is old enough to remember a laugh, a smell, the weight of being lifted. 6 is also old enough to believe whatever story your mother repeats until it becomes the only one. Part 2. The story I repeated was clean because I needed it clean. I told Noah his dad, Eric, went for a run and didn't come back. That there were searches, flyers, police reports. All true, technically. I didn't tell him the part where Eric and I had been screaming at each other 2 hours before that run. Or the part where I watched him pack a bag and pretended I didn't notice. When Eric disappeared, I leaned hard into grief. Everyone did. My parents took shifts at our place. Neighbors brought casseroles. Women from my office left cards on my desk like I'd lost a limb. I learned to cry on cue. I learned to look hollow but brave. Noah grew up with the missing person poster in the hallway closet, folded like a flag. Once a year, around the date, I'd pull it out. We talk about Eric in that soft, safe way people talk about someone who's gone. It was ritual. It was insulation. The truth was uglier, and it lived under the floorboards of my mind. Eric didn't just vanish. He ran. And I knew why he ran because I helped build the cage he was escaping from. In my 20s, I was good at justifying things. I was ambitious. I was tired. I was scared. Those are the ingredients people use to excuse almost anything, including betrayal. Part 3. I met Eric when we were both starting out at the same mid-sized construction company. He was steady, the kind of man who remembered everyone's coffee order, who fixed the office chair that squeaked instead of complaining about it. I was the new accounts payable clerk with student loans and a chip on my shoulder big enough to rent out. We got close fast. He made me feel safe, which I mistook for being owed something. When we married, I wanted the house, the yard, the life that proved my childhood chaos hadn't won. I didn't have patience for later. When the recession hit, our company started bleeding. Hours got cut. People got laid off. Eric tried to be the calm one, saying we'd tighten belts, postpone vacations, ride it out. I heard, "You're going to lose everything you worked for." That's when I made my first real decision in secret. It wasn't a sudden fall off a cliff. It was a series of small steps down. I borrowed from the petty cash to cover daycare. I shifted invoice dates so overdrafts wouldn't hit. Then I discovered how easy it was to create a vendor in the system, one that looked legitimate if you didn't stare too long. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I'd pay it back when things stabilized. I told myself everyone was doing something because how else were people surviving? Eric didn't know. I kept it that way by being careful and by being married to a man who trusted me. The second decision, the one that matters, came when an internal audit started sniffing around. A consultant sat in the conference room, cheerful as a dentist, asking for supporting documentation and clarification. I felt the room narrowing. I felt the ground underneath my life getting soft. I thought about Noah's preschool tuition, about the mortgage, about my parents who'd finally stopped looking at me like I'd be a screw-up forever. Eric came home that night and found me at the kitchen table with spreadsheets open, hands shaking so hard I couldn't click the mouse. He asked what was wrong. I lied, and the lie came out smooth. "They're cutting more jobs," I said. "I'm scared." He wrapped his arms around me from behind and said, "We'll be okay." Later, when he was asleep, I logged in and moved money one more time. enough to make the whole look like it belonged to someone else. Eric had access to several approvals as a project manager. In the system, his name could plausibly appear near the transactions I'd created. I didn't frame him in a dramatic way. I didn't plant evidence in his drawer like a movie villain. I just nudged the numbers so the trail, if followed quickly, would end at him. I told myself if the audit caught it, Eric would explain, and of course they'd believe him. He was Eric. What I didn't tell myself, what I refused to look at, was how much a company wants an answer fast. How hungry people get for a scapegoat when fear is loose in the building. 2 weeks later, Eric was pulled into HR. 2 hours after that, he came home gray-faced and silent, and I knew the trail had worked. Eric didn't yell at first. He sat on the edge of our couch like it didn't belong to him anymore and said, very quietly, "They think I stole money. I did the performance." I looked shocked. I asked questions. I held his hand. Inside, my thoughts were frantic calculations. What did they have? What did they know? How far would they dig? He told me they'd frozen his company access, that the auditor showed him a set of approvals with his credentials, that someone implied he could make this easier if he confessed. "Did you do it?" I asked because I needed to hear him deny it. I needed the denial to be real so my lie could keep breathing. "No," he said, and the hurt in his eyes was worse than anger. "Of course not." I watched him spiral over the next days. Calls with a lawyer we couldn't afford. Meetings that ended in polite nothing. The company filed a police report. Eric's name got whispered in the same hallways where he'd fixed chairs and remembered birthdays. One night he asked to see my laptop. Not accusingly, but with that exhausted desperation of someone reaching for any light switch. "Can I just look at the bank stuff?" he said. "Maybe we can show them we didn't suddenly get rich." I said no. I said I was tired. I said I didn't like him acting like a cop. His face changed. Not into rage, into recognition. Like a puzzle piece slid into place against his will. He stared at me for a long time and said, "I married you. I trusted you. Could have stopped then. I could have told the truth and taken whatever came. Instead, I doubled down." I cried. I said he was paranoid. I said stress was making him cruel. And the next morning, Eric went for his run. The day Eric didn't come back, I did exactly what a wife is supposed to do. I called. I texted. I drove his usual route with my heart in my throat, checking trails and parking lots. I called the police with my voice trembling in all the right places. There were volunteers. There were dogs. There was a helicopter once, thumping overhead like a heartbeat. The detective asked questions about Eric's mental state, his work troubles, whether he'd ever mentioned leaving. I gave answers that were true enough to pass. He was stressed, he was embarrassed, he loved his son. I didn't say he left because I built a trap and then acted like I was surprised when it snapped. For a while, I thought the story might end there. Eric gone. Me a tragic figure. Noah growing up with a hole where a father should be, and me building a whole life around that hole. And life did go on because it always does. The company quietly stopped calling. The police work slowed. People got tired. Another news story replaced ours. I moved us to a smaller place. I sold my wedding ring. I took a second job doing bookkeeping for a local mechanic. I slept with the phone under my pillow like that would change anything. Sometimes I woke up convinced Eric was in the driveway. I'd creep to the window and stare into darkness, furious at myself for hoping. After a year, I told myself he was dead. That was easier. Dead men don't come back to tell you who you really are. After 3 years, I believed the past was buried. I even thought I'd earned that burial through suffering. It turns out suppression isn't forgiveness. It's just storage. Part 7. The part people don't talk about is how missing turns into myth inside a family. Eric became whatever Noah needed him to be on a given day. A hero, a coward, a ghost, a joke when Noah was angry, a saint when Noah was sad. I kept my own version polished. Eric had been depressed. Eric had been overwhelmed. Eric had promised he'd never leave us. And then he did, and sometimes life is inexplicable. People nodded at that. They like stories that don't ask them to do anything. I rebuilt myself in a way that made the original sin feel distant. I went back to school at night and got certified. I became the person who caught other people's mistakes. Eventually, I landed in compliance at a credit union. It was almost funny, me auditing, me lecturing about ethics and documentation and controls. At first, every time I walked past the fraud department, my skin prickled, but repetition dulls discomfort. I learned to separate my life into compartments. In one compartment, I was a competent professional and a single mother doing her best. In the other, I was the woman who'd moved money and then moved blame. There were years I didn't think about the exact moment I typed Eric's credentials into that approval field. Not consciously, but guilt has a way of leaking out sideways. I snapped at Noah when he asked about his dad. I avoided old coworkers. I didn't drink much because when I did, the memories came loose and floated up like dead fish. I told myself I'd paid enough. I told myself the universe was even. Then Noah sent that photo, and suddenly the universe felt like a receipt I hadn't finished reading. Noah wanted to go back immediately. He was right there, he said, breathy, like he'd been running. By the bus stop, like he was waiting. Waiting for what? I asked, and I hated how sharp my voice sounded. For the bus, he said, then softer. For me. I told him to come home. I told him he was getting carried away. I said that man could have been anyone, and it wasn't safe to approach strangers. All reasonable, all protective, all self-serving. Noah didn't argue the way he used to. He just said, "You didn't even ask me what he was wearing. You didn't ask if he talked. You're not curious." My throat tightened. Curiosity is a luxury when you're afraid of what you'll find. He came home and showed me the photo again, zoomed in. The man's face was partially turned away, but there was a profile, nose, cheekbone, that hit me like a slap. "It's him," Noah said. "I know it." I stared until my eyes watered. I felt a wave of something that wasn't relief. It was dread mixed with a strange, sharp grief. Grief for the lie I'd lived inside so long it had molded to me. I said, "Even if it is, people change." Noah's jaw clenched. So did he just forget how to call? That question, asked in my kitchen by a grown man with my eyes, landed heavier than any accusation Eric ever threw at me. I heard myself say, "Sometimes people think they're doing the right thing by staying away." Noah looked at me like he'd never seen me. "Or sometimes," he said, "someone made them think they had no choice." I had no idea what he'd been researching. I just knew the ground I'd been standing on was shifting again. That night, I barely slept. 2 a.m. I went to the hallway closet and pulled out the old missing person poster. Eric's smile stared up at me. Confident, uncomplicated, like he'd never been accused of anything. I found myself thinking about the audit consultant's voice, bright and patient, and how quickly bright voices turn cold when there's money involved. At work the next day, I couldn't focus. Numbers swam, emails blurred. I kept checking my phone like Eric might suddenly text, "I'm alive," and blow the whole thing open with a single sentence. During lunch, I searched public records in our county. I hadn't done that in years. My hands were sweating so badly the mouse slipped. I typed Eric's full name, then widened the search, neighboring counties, state databases. Nothing obvious. I told myself that meant Noah was wrong, that the man in the hoodie was just a look-alike. Then I got an email from an unfamiliar address. "Do you remember me? It's Marcy from Dellinger Construction." My pulse thudded in my ears. Marcy had been in HR back then. Not my friend, not my enemy. Just a woman who knew where bodies could be buried. The email was short. She said she'd run into someone connected to Eric, and that she'd like to talk. She added one line that made my vision go narrow. "It's time you stop pretending you don't know what happened." I sat in the break room staring at those words while the vending machine hummed and someone in the next room laughed. The normality of it was obscene. I'd believed the past was sealed. I'd even built a career around the idea that you can control damage if you follow procedures. But consequences don't need your permission to reopen a file. I met Marcy after work in a diner off the highway, the kind with sticky menus and a TV mounted too high in the corner. She looked older, softer around the eyes, but her gaze was still direct. We didn't do small talk. She slid a manila envelope across the table like it weighed something. I shouldn't have kept copies, she said. But I did. Something about that whole thing never sat right. Inside were printouts from the old audit, approvals, vendor setups, notes from interviews. I recognized my own initials on a couple pages. Tiny, harmless-looking marks next to transactions I'd sworn to myself were invisible. Marcy tapped one page. When Eric vanished, the company decided it was resolved. They didn't want a court case. They didn't want headlines. They wanted it gone. I swallowed. So why are you bringing this to me now? She sighed and stirred her coffee without drinking it. Because someone contacted me last month. A social worker. She said a man came through their program, detox, temporary housing, using the name Eric D. My skin went cold. Marcy kept going. He's not doing great. He's not the same. But he asked for records. He asked if there was any way to clear his name without dragging his kid through it. I gripped the edge of the table. Did he say anything about you? Marcy's mouth tightened. He said you were smarter than he gave you credit for. That's all. I wanted to tell her she was wrong. I wanted to pretend shock. But my face must have given me away, because Marcy leaned back and said quietly, "You knew, didn't you?" The diner smelled like frying oil and old coffee. My mouth tasted metallic. I didn't answer, which was its own answer. Marcy nodded once. "Karma's slow," she said, "but it's thorough." I drove home in silence, white-knuckled, passing the same strip malls and chain restaurants I'd passed 1,000 times, except now everything looked staged, like a set built on top of rot. Noah was waiting in the living room, laptop open, a stack of papers beside him, printouts he'd made himself. "I found something," he said, "about Dad's job back then, about an investigation." My chest tightened. "Why are you digging?" "Because you never did," he said, voice flat. "Or you did and you never told me." He showed me a forum post from years ago. Someone who'd worked at Dellinger, talking about a manager caught in a fraud issue who disappeared before charges. Eric's name was there, misspelled, but recognizable. "It's not just that he left," Noah said. "It's that he left with this hanging over him, and you acted like it was just sadness." I sat down because my legs felt unreliable. "Your father was under a lot of stress," I started. Noah's eyes flashed. "So were you. So was everyone. That doesn't explain why you won't even look at this." The room felt too bright. I could hear the refrigerator cycling on, the small domestic noises that had been my shield. "What do you want from me?" I asked, and it came out harsher than I meant. "I want the truth," he said. "For once." I stared at my son. Grown, stubborn, carrying a wound I'd helped create, and I realized the karma I'd feared wasn't Eric showing up at the door. It was having to answer to the person I'd sworn I was protecting. I opened my mouth, and for a second the truth pressed up like vomit. Then my old instinct kicked in. I said, "You're tired. You're upset. Let's not do this tonight." Noah's face hardened. "That's what you always say. That's how you bury things." He stood up, grabbed his keys, and said, "I'm going back to that bus stop tomorrow, with or without you." I followed him the next day, not dramatically, just in my own car, 2 vehicles back, feeling like a teenager spying on someone else's life. Noah parked near the Kroger. He got out, hands in his jacket pockets, shoulders tight. He walked toward the bus shelter. The man from the photo was there. Same hoodie, same posture. Closer now, I could see the gray in his beard, the deep lines around his mouth. He looked like Eric run through a rough machine. Noah stopped a few feet away. "Dad?" he said, and his voice cracked on the single syllable. The man looked up slowly. His eyes landed on Noah, and something moved across his face. Shock, grief, a kind of shame that seemed to fold him inward. He didn't smile. He didn't rush forward. He just whispered, "Noah." Hearing my son's name in Eric's voice, older, raspier, hit me so hard my hands started shaking on the steering wheel. Noah stepped closer, searching the man's face like he was trying to match it to a memory. "Where have you been?" Eric's gaze flicked past Noah, scanning the parking lot. His eyes found my car. For a moment, we just stared at each other through glass. No magic, no destiny, just two people confronting the wreckage of choices. Eric flinched like he'd been struck. He turned back to Noah and said, too quickly, I can't do this here." Noah's voice rose. "You can't do what? Be my dad?" Eric's shoulders sagged. "I tried to stay away so you could have a life." Noah laughed once, sharp and humorless. "A life with a lie?" Eric swallowed and said, "Ask your mom." That line was the knife. It wasn't revengey. It was tired, like he'd carried it for years and was finally setting it down. Noah looked toward my car, confusion turning into something darker. I got out because hiding was pointless now. The air was cold enough to sting my lungs. Eric stood there, hands trembling slightly, and I noticed small things. Scabbed knuckles, cheap sneakers, the way his weight shifted like his joints hurt. This wasn't a man who'd been living some secret second family life. This was a man who'd been surviving. Noah said, "Mom, what is he talking about?" I tried to speak and couldn't. My mouth opened but no sound came at first. Eric cleared his throat. "They said I stole," he told Noah. "Your mom. She didn't believe me. Or she did. I don't know. I just know I couldn't fight it and I couldn't stay." Noah's face went pale. "Is that true?" he asked me. I heard myself say, "I was scared." Noah blinked hard. "That's not an answer." Eric's eyes stayed on me. There was no rage in them, just a deep, exhausted disappointment. That was worse. "I did it," I said. The words felt both foreign and inevitable. "I moved money. I made it look like it went through you. I told myself it would never get to that point. I told myself you'd be able to explain it away." Noah made a sound like he'd been punched. "You let me think he abandoned me." I started crying then, not pretty. My face burned. I didn't know how to fix it. And then you were 6 and everyone was looking at me like I was the widow, and I just kept going. Eric's voice was quiet. "I spent 3 months sleeping in my truck. Then I crossed state lines because I thought I'd get arrested. Then I started drinking just to stop thinking." Noah stared at the ground, jaw clenched, tears sliding down his face in a way that made him look young again. "All this time," he said, "it wasn't a mystery. It was you." We stood in that parking lot like a broken family photo no one would frame. Cars came and went. A woman pushed a cart full of groceries past us, glancing once and then looking away, the same social instinct I'd relied on for years. People mind their business. That's how lies survive. Noah asked Eric where he'd been living. Eric shrugged, embarrassed. Shelters, couch surfing, a couple stints in county for stupid stuff. Public intoxication, mostly. He rubbed his hands together like he was cold, or ashamed, or both. "I tried rehab twice. I get clean and then think about you and it would crush me." Noah swallowed. "Why didn't you call?" Eric's laugh was small. "Call and say what?" "Hey, son. I'm the guy everyone thinks is a thief, and your mom thinks so too?" His eyes flicked to me. And after a while, time passes and you think, if I show up now, I ruin whatever life you have. Noah's gaze snapped back to me. "You ruined it anyway." That's the role reversal I didn't see coming. My son looking at me the way I'd once looked at Eric, like trust was something I'd wasted. Eric asked Noah if he wanted to sit somewhere and talk. Noah hesitated, then said, "Not with her. I deserved that." The exclusion was clean, immediate consequence. I tried to say, "Noah, please," but pow, the word please sounded childish, like a kid begging to keep a toy she'd broken. Noah stepped back and said, "I need space. From both of you, but mostly from you." Eric started to follow him, dazed, and looked at me. His voice was barely above traffic noise. "You got your career," he said. "You got to be respectable. I hope it was worth it." Then he turned away, and my son walked beside him, Not touching, not reunited. Just two strangers sharing blood and pain. I stood there alone, realizing karma doesn't always arrive as punishment. Sometimes it arrives as truth, and you just have to live inside it. Noah didn't come home that night. He texted that he was staying at a friend's. His message was polite in a way that scared me more than anger. I'm safe. Don't wait up. Over the next weeks, he spoke to me only when necessary. He moved out within 2 months, faster than I expected, like he'd been ready to leave and just needed a final reason. When he did come by, he moved through the house like a guest. He didn't look at the hallway closet. He didn't ask about the missing person poster. Eric called me once from a number I didn't recognize. He said he wasn't going to the police, not because he forgave me, but because he was tired and because dragging it up wouldn't give him back the years. I'm trying to get stable, he said, voice thin. For Noah, if he'll let me. I told him I was sorry. The words sounded cheap in my own ears. Work changed, too. I started flinching every time someone mentioned audits. My manager complimented my integrity in a meeting, and I felt my face flush hot with shame. I considered resigning, then realized quitting wouldn't be penance. It would be avoidance dressed as morality. Sometimes I imagine telling the whole story publicly, confessing, letting consequences fall where they may. Then I picture Noah reading it and realizing I'm still trying to control the narrative, still trying to make myself the main character of his loss. So I sit with it. I drive past the Kroger sometimes and look at the bus shelter. It's just metal and plastic. No ghosts, no signs, just a place people wait. I thought time would bury what I did. Time only gave it roots. Now my son's life is built around a truth I kept from him, and my own life is built around a lie I told so often it became my posture. Some debts don't come with collectors. They come back as the look on your child's face when he realizes who you really are, and there's nothing you can do but watch him walk away.